is an increasingly serious threat in the African continent, which of course is amongst the most vulnerable continents to the effects of climate change. According to the African Development Bank, climate change represents a major threat to the African continent when it comes to achieving sustainable goals development. The Paris Agreement reached at COP21, countries agreed to take collective action on climate change in order to keep temperature increases to more than 2 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels, while the World Meteorological Organization last month said climate change on the African continent could destabilize countries and regions. The United Nations Environment Programme went ahead to bring forth some ways to which the continent could respond to this natural phenomenon. Today, we will be answering how leaders across Africa could adverse the impact of climate change on the continent. Stay with us. Thank you immensely for joining us on this first edition for the week of Voice It over your Pan-African channel for you Media Africa. Today we're talking about climate change and seeing how African leaders could play a vital role in order to averse the impact climate change does have on the African continent. Just to reiterate, some time ago, African leaders did stipulate that the continent needs some $2.5 trillion in order to advert the impact climate change does have on Africa. And today I am joined by two seasoned guests. I'm joined by Mr. NJINE ELVIS BANEH, who is a political analyst as well as the National Communications Secretary for the Popular Action Party. Good day, sir.
Good afternoon, madam, and of course, good day to all your viewers. It's a pleasure once again to be on your platform.
Thank you immensely for accepting our invitation. In order to introduce our second guest, he is Mr. ABBEYTAKOR ATONG. He is the Global Youth Ambassador as well as a Sustainable Development Goal Coordinator here in Cameroon. Good day to you, sir.
Thank you for having me in your program, and I'm delighted to share my thoughts with respect to this amazing topic. Thank you very much.
Thank you immensely too for honoring our invitation. In order to get down to the table on our discussion this afternoon, the first question I'll be targeting will be to you, Mr. NJINE ELVIS. What is your evaluation of the climate situation that we have as we speak on the African continent?
Well, overall, I think the issue of the climate change is quite a reality. And it is felt everywhere. Even back here in Africa, we see that climate change actually has what I would describe as some devastating impacts on the African continent, like in other parts of the world. But then, with respect to the topic as we are going to be looking at it this afternoon, madam, I want to think that in as much as Africa may be suffering from the climate change and its impacts on Africa, I think there is much that will need to be done in Africa and in the African continent, maybe from elsewhere, for it to reverse the situation on the African continent, but not necessarily from within the continent.
Thank you immensely for that very interesting introduction. So I'd like to equally get your opinion, Mr. Atong. What is your evaluation of climate change in Africa?
All right. Okay, thank you. Can I go on?
Yeah, right on, sir.
Okay, thank you so much for having me once again. Climate change is one very, very important topic in the global landscape, and it affects all societies. It's not just a problem for a specific continent. It's a subject that is being discussed at the global stage. And with respect to climate change in Africa, it causes a lot of challenges with respect to the rising sea levels, temperature increases, and food insecurity. And of course, COVID-19, coronavirus, has also come to exacerbate these challenges with respect to the climate change crisis that we face in Africa, making the poor and marginalized suffer for respect to various challenges. And as such, it's a concern, it's a great concern, and it requires keen attention and keen interest in order to address this given crisis.
Thank you so much for that brilliant introduction. Okay, to you, Mr. NJINE ELVIS, in your opinion, what do you think needs to be done in order to ensure that there is equal participation from all stakeholders involved when it comes to managing the impacts of climate change in Africa?
Well, for all to be able to participate in resolving the climate change situation in Africa, I think it first of all has to do with some general sensitization. The entire continent should be sensitized. Leaders as well as individuals, Africans as a whole, should understand that it is a reality and that everybody needs to actually feel involved and get involved. So everybody has to put his or her hand on deck to see into it that we do what is necessary for this situation to be some sort of, let's say, reverse. Now, so that's the first thing. There should be some general sensitization. People should know that it is first and foremost a reality when we talk about climate change and that it has devastating consequences on the continent. Secondly, we will go back now to the different African governments. Apart from sensitizing the people, I think we need leadership that will also have a vision that can come up with a clear-cut plan that they have for the continent as far as fighting climate change is concerned. You know, in your introduction, you just mentioned the fact that African leaders are demanding $2.5 trillion. You know, at one point in time, when I hear such a thing, to me, it sounds ridiculous. Ridiculous because when they say they need, they are demanding from who? This is the unfortunate situation because African leaders, most often that we have at hand as of now, they rather see such opportunities to go to the Western world, demand for huge sums of money, which they bring back into the continent and rather embezzle, and it doesn't actually serve the purpose for which it was actually intended. I want to think that as Africans, there is a lot we can do to be able to fight climate change without necessarily going to demand for such huge sums that I'm getting of 2.5 trillion. We have the planting of trees, for instance. These are things that can be done at very low cost in all the African countries. And madam, you know, an unfortunate thing even that we face in this country or in this continent is that we don't yet, or we have yet to come to the realization that we need to work as a people. You know, the fact that we still work so dividedly is a serious problem. If we were to work as a united people, you see, in that case, we will understand that there are some parts of Africa may be affected by drought, even, let me say, by virtue of their geographical location, where we could, as a continent, decide to go there and do some sort of planting of trees, you see, to already avert the situation from that part, from those parts of the continent. But this will not happen. Why? Because people don't want to embrace it as a global something and to fight it as every man's problem. Rather, we want to look at it as individual perspectives because some people at the end of the day will have certain things they want to benefit at the end of the day. Secondly, Africa in itself is that's sub-Saharan Africa. We are more of a forest region, and I want to think that we can already do much by even just preserving the natural forest that we already have. But unfortunately, we see our leadership that is more concerned with selling out the forest to foreigners who come and they fell out trees without any secondary plan of replanting the trees that are being felled, you see, and that is already another problem that we are facing in Africa here as far as climate change is concerned. You cannot have a natural forest and you keep felling down the trees without ever thinking of replanting or what we call reforestation. So these are some of the things that we also need to take into consideration as a people to be able to see into it that today or tomorrow we do not suffer much more consequences when it comes to the effect of the climate change. And of course, my brother mentioned something about the increase in temperatures. I still want to think that when you come to a capital like Yaoundé, for instance, if the government of Cameroon, for instance, could, in designing a town like Yaoundé, earmark areas where trees are planted and all whatnot, you will realize that at least the production or the growth of those trees will drastically reduce the temperature that we may have within at least the capital cities. But like I said, these are some of the basic things that could be done. I remember way back when we went to school in the primaries, there were days that we were asked to bring trees and then we plant them maybe in the school gardens or school farms and all whatnot. But today, governments have totally neglected some of these things, and we keep complaining because we are looking for a possibility where we can go borrowing money from Europe, money that at the end of the day will end up being embezzled by some individuals. So for the beginning, madam, I think those are some of the key things that if we were to do as countries, as a continent, at least it will already go a long way in helping us to resolve the climate change difficulties we are facing. Thank you.
That in those days children were permitted, or pupils so to say were permitted to come to school with trees, as you cited your example that they were permitted to come with trees which are planted, and that was very important for their education and important as well for the environment. Now I'll be turning to you, Mr. Atong. Today we're discussing how African leaders can contribute to adversing the impact of climate change in Africa. But then leaders last week, African leaders last week, when they said they were going to advocate for a common energy position which sees fossil fuel as necessary when it comes to the expansion of economies and definitely electricity access on the African continent come November 2022, when it shall be time for COP27. Now the question I would like to ask is, in your opinion, do you think this dream by African leaders is actually feasible when it comes to averting the impacts of climate change?
All right, thank you once again. You know, this is a very, very important topic, and the Committee of African Heads of States and the Government on Climate Change sat together because this great challenge is a pressing one on the African continent, and of course it accounts for 3 to 5% of a reduction in the GDP of most African continents. So it's a great challenge, and with respect to this, I don't think that will really hold true with respect to their plans, because just dwelling directly from fossil fuels, okay, will not really solve the problem. Now, with respect to government leaders' action, and with respect to this problem, most African leaders need to begin from the grassroots. They must begin equipping young pupils in schools with the knowledge of planting trees and the knowledge of climate change. They must know that it's something that greatly affects them, and if action steps are not put in place right from the infantile level, then we'll have catastrophic results at the end. And with respect to government's approach to climate change, they have to bring young people on board, because the policies and the decisions that will be taken at this level will be such that it will affect not just the leaders in power, because of course, imagine the president who is, say, 80 years or 75. Of course, he will not live to see the experiences or the results or the consequences of the decisions he has made in the next 10 to 15 years. But a young man, say, of 20 years or 25, of course, 10 years from now, you live those experiences. So young people have to be brought on the decision table. It's high time that leaders need to bring young people on the decision table. Policy making programs need to involve young people. What approach are they going to take in order to mitigate this problem? You have the goal of leaders to decrease the increase in temperature and keep it stable below 2 degrees Celsius. You see, the exacerbating the increase in temperature at the level of the polar regions result in floods and I mean difficulty and suffering. So my point is that the government and African leaders must approach this problem by ensuring that courses are being taken in elementary school that helps create an awareness of this pressing problem about climate change, and they must begin addressing it right from the elementary level, and young people as well have to be brought on the table to make decisions that will affect their lives 5 years to 10 years from now.
Exactly, you cited the important role of the youth when it comes to making decisions when it comes to the impact of climate change. Now, just to recall, during the African Climate Week that took place last month in Libreville, the Deputy Director of the United Nations Environment Program, Dr. Richard Munang, he cited that, or he evoked that the youth have a very vital role to play when it comes to fighting against climate change on the African continent. Now you are a global or youth global ambassador, youth global leader. In your opinion, how can the youth fully engage in this fight?
All right. Thank you again. As a global youth ambassador, I've been engaged in climate change issues for quite a while now. And 2 years ago, that's 2020, I carried out a sensitization in a school. I forgot to upload. I could have uploaded so that you see. In a school in Boya here, where I went to the school with papers, infographics to show the kids the importance of mitigating actions that that fuel the manifestation of climate change. What are those causes that really impact on humans that cause climate change? So I went on to explain all of that, and the kids were really very inspired. Okay, and this is very, very crucial when it comes to our approach to this problem. Now, as a global youth ambassador, what I can say with respect to government approach by engaging the youth in climate change is that they can organize competitions. They can organize competitions where young people come together, pitch projects that help to mitigate climate change effects, and I mean across the nation. Bring up projects that they can, young people can engage in. You know, when young people engage in projects that really concern them, they are really interested in it. So coming out with projects like that will really be good. And also as youth, we want our voice to be heard. Like I said, the young people are not just the young people of this generation are not just youth who just want policies to be made. No, they want to be actively involved in the decision-making process, because they know that the decisions that will be taken now in 2022, they will live to experience the result in, say, 2025. But our leaders who are, say, 70, 80 now may not live to experience such. So we want to be on the table to ensure that the policies that are taken are such that we will benefit from.
So much. Very, very interesting contributions. Over to you, Mr. NJINE ELVIS. Earlier on, you cited that several countries across the African continent are being affected by climate change. As your co-panelist was earlier stating, he cited a lot of environments, not just at the African continent level, but even in Cameroon here, that are affected by climate change. But then you cited some countries, and want to recall that Kenya in Eastern Africa is affected by climate change with droughts. We have Nigeria, we have the Horn of Africa, so to say. Now, at these various levels, these countries they're facing the impact of climate change. But as a political analyst, what do you think needs to be done?
Well, madam, you know, I think I already said it before, that the very first thing we need to do is some sort of global, or let me say general sensitization, and of course the educational system too. I think my co-panelist said something in that same direction or dimension, and I would like to reiterate here. When we talk about the impact of climate change in Africa, I am still saying we have leaders who at one point in time need to move beyond their intention and actually make sure that their actions are actually felt on the ground. Because you know, one thing with our African leaders is that they sometimes have good intentions, but the implementation phase of it ends up being a serious problem. Some of them don't even have a plan of action at all for the African continent. I have said, and I will reiterate, that if we want change as far as the climatic conditions in Africa is concerned, you have cited countries, Kenya, the Horn of Africa, and all whatnot. One thing is, we must let the youth be actively engaged in some of these things, because unfortunately we have a leadership in Africa which is an aging leadership, and when we talk about the planting of trees, they will certainly not be the ones to go about planting the trees. But if you let the youth understand the need or the benefit of having trees around them, and that these trees will be to their own advantage in years to come, then believe you me, they can successfully go out there and be able to replant. You see, let the government simply make available these different trees, the different species that may be able to grow in the different parts of the continent, and let the youth take action and do the planting. Believe you me that it will always be an added joy to every young African, to every human being who plants a tree somewhere and is able to come back 5, 10, 15 years after to say, I was the one who planted this tree. That's why I say sensitization is the first thing. Secondly, education. Now, my brother mentioned about projects. You know, in Africa, in some countries, we talk about the CBA approach of education today in schools, but in reality, it's not practical on the ground. We should learn to teach children through projects. Let the children be thrown the ideas, and then they now work on them and come out with projects, with their own concrete ideas with respect to what they view tomorrow to look like. You see, that is the only way we can actually achieve this thing, because I keep insisting on the fact that the present leadership cannot be the one, you see, to go about planting the trees we are talking about. Let them make the resources available, resources that we are very, very convinced that we have in Africa. That is why when I talk of resources here, I am not in support of the idea of people going back there to Europe to borrow money that we earn in private coffers and will be embezzled. We have the means here to be able to replant trees without seeking foreign aid from whosoever. You see, the problem is just the will. Our leaders should have the will and allow the youth implement. And if they do not have any plan of action, let them bring the youth onto the decision-making table. The youth themselves will be able to come up with tangible ideas as to what they think can be done to make the continent a better one in the next 10, 20, 30, 40 years as far as afforestation is concerned. That is what I can tell you for now.
So having listened to you, one is tempted to say definitely that the main focus when it comes to battling climate change is about us planting trees. Do you have any other suggestions that African leaders can actually learn from when it comes to adversing the impact of this natural phenomenon?
Well, when we talk about other things that African leaders could learn or copy from elsewhere, perhaps, you know, there is also the issue of industrialization. Then you and I know that if in Europe the concentration of industries are also affecting climate change and destroying the ozone layers, we know that in Africa we don't even have these industries. That's the very first thing, and that's an honest truth we should tell ourselves. If I take my own country, Cameroon, how many of these industries do we have that we may perforce want to argue that it is because of these industries that our climate or the temperatures in Africa are increasing? On the contrary, I think it is the felling of trees. That is one of the most important things we have in Africa. Then secondly, environmental studies should also be emphasized in schools. You see, people should not just go and read theory maybe in geography and other things. We should actually know exactly how to handle the soil. You know, when you come back, for instance, back here, there is this issue of bushfires. We have an agricultural system in Africa where at the dry season, everybody goes burning. Those are some of the things so that should also be discouraged as far as Africa is concerned. It is an archaic farming system where people think that to get the soil fertilized, we rather go burning. You see, it should be discouraged, and other alternatives as to fertilizing the soil are brought in to ensure that not only we maintain the soil fertility, but that the climatic condition of the continent is not also affected. So I think talking about borrowing from other parts of the world to implement in Africa, we could send our youth to other countries, to other continents, to see what they are doing when it comes to, like I say, developing the soil or maintaining the soil and their forest. But in terms of industrialization, honestly speaking, I am afraid we have not yet gotten to that level to want to claim that climate change in Africa is caused by industrialization, because we don't even have the industries in the first place.
Exactly. I would like to seek your opinion equally, Mr. Atong. What do you think is Africa's main focus when it comes to climate change? Or should be Africa's main focus?
Okay, Africa's main focus should be to prevent the effects of climate change, rather prevent the factors that will result in the consequences of climate change, rather than just focusing on the consequences. Now, African leaders need to take more of a preventive approach rather than a treatment kind of approach. Now I'm talking now with respect to health. Okay, so African leaders need to actually understand that the way we study is very different from what we study. Like my co-panelist, Mr. NJINE ELVIS, just said, he actually spoke very well. You see, in situations where school students are just being baptized with lectures in classrooms, a teacher will just come, okay, I'm doing biology, and say some kind of things that, of course, that child can understand 90% of what has been said if that child was taken to the field. But with respect to the theory, no matter how you sing the song left and right, or the characteristics of a human being, or reproduction, the child will never understand. So what I'm trying to say here is that how we study is more important than what we study. Young people have to be trained to see climate change not just as a subject for because that is how young people still see. I'm talking as an expert on the field. That is how young people still see. They still see climate change as a subject that is suited for just the environmentalists, those doing environmental science at the university. No. Climate change is a subject that affects not just doctors, not just lawyers, not just teachers, not just environmentalists, but cuts across all sectors, because we all are living in one planet. You agree with me that if this planet is overheated above 2 degrees, it would not be adequate to support life. And no matter who you are, whether you're a professor, whether you're a president, whether you're a what, I don't care, you will face the consequences. And that is why my brother earlier said, it is not just the good intentions, it is the practicality. What is the plan of execution? What is the strategy that has been put in place to ensure that this good decision that they have taken is implemented? Like he said, most of them will just go collect money, and when they collect money, you don't see the accountability of that money. They'll just go use, say, one school, do a little project, and then they snap and send. They say, oh, they are fighting against climate change. But we see there are areas that there is still massive deforestation. So it's a concern, and the way young people have to see it, it depends too on our educational system. So we need to see climate change as a problem that affects everybody. And our approach to it has to be very quick, because if we don't take strategic, timely steps, we won't be able to save our planet. And if I should send a very strong message, I will say that we have just one planet. Irrespective of your political portfolio, irrespective of your social level, your economic standard, we all are living in one planet called the Earth. And if we don't take care, if we don't see this problem as a personal issue first, not just as a government issue, if we don't see this as a personal issue and address this as individuals, then we will face grave consequences in the years to come.
Definitely, we'll be coming back to what you just said at your very powerful message. But then I would like to give the floor now to Mr. NJINE ELVIS. Given or listening to what Mr. Atong said earlier, he cited a lot of points which you had earlier on mentioned. How can we deal with this at our various levels? How can we deal with this natural phenomenon?
Are you getting me?
Yes, I can get you, sir.
Well, when you talk about various levels, I don't understand. As individuals or as states?
As a planet, as a continent, now I'm not looking at governments, I'm not looking at individuals, I'm not really looking at education systems, but as a whole, how can we handle climate change?
Well, as a planet, I think it would take me now more into my Pan-Africanist casket. I would rather say that African leaders should be aware of what they also get from the Western world as advice on how Africa should manage climate change. Why am I saying it this way? I'm saying so because, like I earlier mentioned with respect to industries, we know that the industries that are destroying the ozone layers in the world are in the Western world, but they will rather come giving lectures back to Africans on what they should do, you see, to be able to fight climate change. I think that as a planet, every individual, every country should be able to see into it that they look for alternative ways of that alternative means of energy, for instance, that they use. But I'm talking here particularly the industrialized countries, because I keep saying that Africa is not yet industrialized. You see, that's the first thing as a planet. The European countries should look for other alternatives of using energy that will not be destructive to the entire planet. That's the first thing I will say. Secondly, when we talk about fighting climate change globally as a people, I want to think that it should be concerted effort where everybody sits and comes up with a tangible idea as to what is to be done. And I think at one point in time too, that some particular nations in the world should even be taxed extra as to what they are supposed to chip in when it comes to fighting climate change, with respect to the degree of pollution that they also do produce when it comes to polluting the entire planet. Because like I said, there are some super advanced developed countries that are even contributing more when it comes to pollution, but at the end of the day, the fight becomes a global fight and everybody has to fight it at its own level. So I think that generally some countries or some parts of the world will need to be a caution as to certain limits they should not be able to go beyond if they cannot get alternative means of energy, or if they must consider that way, that when it comes to fighting in terms of maybe resources, be they human or material or financial, they should also be able to chip in a certain reasonable percentage. And now, coming back to the African continent particularly, I will still want to insist on the fact that at our level here, we first of all need more of sensitization, because people still do not believe in the fact that the climate change is a reality. When you see all the recent floods, for instance, we have in certain parts of Africa, right up to even areas that we used to know were desert parts of Africa, then I think it should no longer be news to anyone that climate change is a reality. But then we still need more of sensitization first in Africa. Then our leaders, I insist, should review the type of education that we get in our schools. You know, I keep insisting when it comes to education that we are more of we get more of theory in Africa than something practical, and it's a serious problem. You cannot fight climate change by just sitting in amphitheaters to tell people that there is climate change and that for this. No. People must go out to the field and be able to do things practically. We have mentioned already in passing the idea of planting of trees. We have mentioned in passing reviewing maybe our irrigation systems. We have mentioned in passing the idea of reviewing our farming systems, where we still believe much in burning of farmlands and bushes as a means of farming and overnight. So all these are things that I think as a planet we need to consider, seriously consider, to be able to curb the situation.
So yes, I would like to direct this question to you, Mr. Atong. According to the World Meteorological Center organization, it stated that climate change on Africa could destabilize regions and countries as a whole. Now, we're looking at conflicts in Africa. We are looking precisely at, say, the Horn of Africa, for instance. We're looking equally at the eastern part of the African continent. How can climate change and conflict interrelate?
Generally is a very, very sensitive issue for affecting generally the global landscape, and climate change also has a relationship with conflict. Okay, conflict in the sense that, of course, most African leaders right now are saying they want to tend to renewable sources of energy, such as geothermal energy, hydroelectric energy, you have wind energy, and so on. So most of them are turning into that. And with respect to certain conventions that are signed, it also some bottlenecks and some persons have certain interests. Like my co-panelist said, most of them will solicit for funds and in turn embezzle the funds. And also the various problems that are associated with climate change, such as poor soils that result in food insecurity, and this food insecurity also results in the price.
We shall be coming back to you, Mr. Atong. Okay, right on, sir.
The cost for fertilizers, and most of our African farmers are not utilizing fertilizers.
Mr. Atong, are you with us? Okay, we shall be coming back to you subsequently, probably due to the connection problems. Over to you, Mr. NJINE. Having listened to what Mr. Atong said so far, what do you think is supposed to be the role of the World Meteorological Center or organization when it comes to preventing the impact of climate change on the African continent? Mr. NJINE? Okay, due to connection issues, we shall be coming back to you, Mr. NJINE, and of course, Mr. Atong. Just to reiterate that today we are discussing how African leaders can play a vital role when it comes to managing the impact climate change does have on the African continent and the globe at large. Of course, just to reiterate, as we said so far, the world or African leaders, when they sat during a conference last week, they did said that the African continent does need a $2.5 trillion in order to reverse or adverse the impact climate change does have on the continent. As we are saying, the various panelists have reiterated several points that definitely African leaders need to take into consideration when it comes to fighting this natural phenomenon that is not just affecting or plaguing Africa, but it's plaguing the globe at large. And come November 2022, African leaders are going to sit down with world leaders to see how they can bring about solutions to the climate change challenges that the African continent is facing. So on that note, if we still don't have a guest, we're going to gradually run down to the end of today's edition of Voice It over your Pan-African channel for you media. Just to say that African leaders, individuals at various levels, even governments, even the education systems do have a very vital role to play when it comes to combating this natural challenge that is not just plaguing our very own planet Earth, but it's plaguing every other place around the world. Ladies and gentlemen, it's on that note that we shall be drawing down the curtains of today's edition of Voice It over your Pan-African channel for you Media Africa. I have NJIX NABESEH for presentation, and do remember, as you're watching our programs, planting a tree is very important when it comes to combating climate change on the world. Bye-bye.